Chapter 13. Brenda had endured her father's visits almost nightly. She wondered if he believed this to be part of his parental duty. With the advent of James' letter, Brenda knew she could endure it perhaps a little longer. Soon she would stop her father. She would put an end to the madness that felt so wrong. Since she had grown into a woman who could distinguish love from sex, the attacks had become that much more unendurable. If I don't stop this madness, all Doc Gray's work will be in vain, Brenda thought. Her love for James would be forever tainted if she did not face Lewis. Sure, James could carry her away, but that was not enough. She had to fight back herself. She had to show her father how very much she hated him for what he had done. He might hit her, he might hurt her, but nothing could be as bad as the hurt she had already suffered. If I get a fractured jaw, so what? Jaws can heal. The pain will be a small price to pay for the satisfaction. And when it is all over, I will leave, Brenda said to herself. There would be a way out now. She fought her father's control in any way she could. When school started, she got a job working at the local coffee shop. It was another way to keep out of the house for a few more hours during the day. She made a little money and enjoyed the customers' conversations, at least most of them, like the one she had the week before. I think I'm in love. Brenda turned around, wiping her hands on her apron. What did you say? She asked. I said, I think I'm in love, a voice at the counter replied. The first thing Brenda noticed about the man was his size. Judging by the breadth of the hand wrapped around the coffee cup, he was close to 6 feet tall. She looked him in the eye. Small slits set in a heavy face. He smiled, his mouth revealing tiny teeth. Brenda smiled back at tiny teeth and his Promethean jaw. And why would you say such a thing? Brenda asked, laying her dish towel on the counter. Because, the soldier replied, adjusting black horn-rimmed glasses more evenly on his face, I think you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. Well, Brenda replied, wiping the counter quickly in front of him, thank you for the compliment. Have anything else? Apple pie? The young man reached casually into the top pocket of his shirt, distorting the neat black stencil, Donovan, written across it. His fingers emerged with a cigarette. He wasn't used to being so casually brushed off by women. No, this coffee will do fine, thanks, he said gruffly, the words emerging around the cigarette as he lit it. He watched her as she moved gracefully to the other end of the counter, his eyes veiled, though they hid a steadily increasing interest. Harry Donovan let his mind wander over the last 4 years, seeing again the foreign sights and sounds that would never leave his memory. Fayetteville, Hope Mills, and Parkton should have been familiar names to the North Carolinian, but Saigon, Bien Hoa, and Lac Ninh were the towns he grew up in. He had been christened Harold Charles Donovan, but he was just Harry now, having dropped out of high school to enlist, Class 11B, 11 Bang Bang, foot soldier, U.S. Army. Harry ignored the memories of futile patrols he had headed, the endless swamps and jungles with Viet Cong snipers, and recalled instead the happy times, the furloughs, the bars, the women, especially the women. His pig-like eyes twinkled as he recalled days and nights in Saigon, lost amidst an endless supply of drugs, booze, and every kind of horror imaginable. Short ones, tall ones, different countries, different languages, but he knew the universal language well enough. He had every kind of woman in the world, and here he was, Harry Donovan, sitting in Carter's coffee shop across from Gate 5 at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, out of his mind in love with a waitress, and not a very polite one at that. He scratched the dark stubble on his chin reflectively, figuring his next move. All women were alike. This would be one more, but God, she is beautiful, he said to himself. That face, so sweet and innocent. The eyes, light green one minute, deep blue the next, ever changing like a deep pool of strange water. He watched her open the freezer, reaching for a large slab of brisket, turn and set it on the counter, shutting the freezer door, all in one smooth motion. Probably a good cook, too. See ya, he said in a loud whisper, throwing one leg off the stool and striding across the room, his heavy-soled boots echoing. The door jingled merrily as he swung it open and disappeared around the corner. Brenda had not noticed the big soldier leave. She had extracted a long-bladed butcher knife from the drawer and was cutting long slices of the frozen meat for today's lunch special. She cut the rock-hard brisket easily, for James' friend Hiroshi had also been a knife expert, a skill he taught Brenda Jean. Surprisingly, she had been an apt pupil and felt at ease around the most forbidding blades. She cut through the meat with a sure, rhythmic motion, each stroke producing another long slice. She looked up from her work long enough to glimpse a soldier in the frosted front window facing Route 41A. It was Harry Donovan. He grinned. The bell jingled again. She heard his boots as he approached the meat counter. "Hi," he said, still grinning. "Change your mind yet?" "About what?" Brenda replied, glancing up. What an idiotic look he has on his face, she thought, and that cowlick sticking up and back. He looks like a gargantuan alfalfa. She smiled. "About talking to me," Harry said, pulling another cigarette from his pocket and thumbing the lighter with the other hand. "Do you want another cup of coffee?" Brenda asked. "Did I stutter?" he replied, laying a huge bare arm on the chrome counter. "I want you. I need you. You are beautiful. Come home with me, baby." Without a word, and without missing a stroke, Brenda lifted the foot-long knife and laid it neatly across Harry's bare arm, just hard enough to draw blood. "Damn, what'd you do that for?" The soldier jerked his arm back, blood trailing across the counter, almost knocking over the sugar shaker off the bar in the process. "I don't like your attitude, that's all," Brenda returned politely. "I'll bandage it for you if you like." The soldier sucked in a breath, his eyes narrowing, and for a moment he was back in the jungles of Vietnam. "Hell no!" he barked. "Don't you even get near me. I'll get it fixed at the infirmary. Sorry I came back, sister." He trudged out of the shop, glaring at the merry little bell as it tinkled. What a boob, Brenda thought, laying down the blade and reaching for a clean one. With those hairy arms of his, I don't dare use the same knife. She tossed it into the sink, found a duplicate, and continued with the beef. All at once, she remembered the patch on the soldier's left sleeve. She had seen hundreds of them at Camp Cooey Medical Center on Okinawa when she was a candy striper. Olive drab with a black border, eagle wing extending downward to enclose a sword. The Viet Cong paid $5 each for those badges. They paid $100 for a Marine insignia, but the herd, 173rd Armored Division, was still a fearsome bunch. That would explain the peculiar gleam in his eye when she brought the knife down on his arm. Brenda's hair rose at the back of her neck. She had just cut a man who had, what? Burned villages? Shot children? Watched his buddies dying just outside the concertina wire? 2 days later, as Brenda walked in the front door of Carter's after school, she saw a familiar figure perched on a stool. She recognized the massive shoulders and the reluctant cowlick. It was Harry something. As she nudged her way through the tangle of chairs, she noticed his height again. Even sitting down, the soldier was as tall as some customers standing up. Brenda walked around the back of the counter, reaching for an apron. "I see you came back." "Sorry about the other day," Brenda said, meaning it. Harry Eugene Donovan smiled. "It's all right," he said, grinning as he stirred his coffee. "I guess I deserved it. I gotta tell you, I was pissed. But the more I thought about it, the funnier it got. I'll give you credit, you stand up for yourself. I like that in a woman." He looked at her frankly, and there was honest approval in his eyes. Brenda felt a blush roll over her. "I'm sorry, but like I said, would you like some more coffee?" "Sure." Brenda poured the steaming liquid carefully. The coffee hissed and splattered anyway, spilling onto the GI's fingers, which he gallantly overlooked. "No hard feelings?" Harry said, setting the cup down and sticking his right hand over the counter. Brenda hesitated, but his good-natured smile was hard to resist. "No hard feelings," she said, giving her hand slightly into his huge palm. "Now, will you marry me?" "Certainly not," Brenda replied, at once pleased and insulted. "Well, there's always tomorrow," Harry said, counting out 38 cents and laying it on the counter. "See ya." Brenda shook her head in disbelief, then turned to a neighboring customer at the bar. "What can I do for you, Mr. Grimes?" Harry Donovan returned to the coffee shop every day after that. At least once a week he asked Brenda to marry him, an offer she always refused, newly amazed at his boorish pride. August came, with its stifling heat, and the little diner was like an inferno, cooled only by the oscillating fans over the grill and the chair propped against the open door, courtesy of a departing customer. Brenda wiped a greasy hand across her forehead, leaving a smear of dirt and sweat in its place. By November, the only joy she hoped for was another one of James' letters, and those would continue indefinitely. James had returned stateside, but was working at Thomas Trucking as a driver, just long enough to save money for the wedding, he insisted. She heard the insistent ding of the order up bell and turned to embrace another armload of scrambled eggs and bacon, pancakes and sausage. She balanced the 4 plates on her right arm easily, stepping into the narrow aisle. As she passed the front counter, she felt something sliding around her waist. Instinctively, she doubled over and the plates crashed to the floor. "Damn!" she cried, cursing herself for her clumsiness, when she turned to see Harry Donovan seated behind her, the apron still dangling from his grasp. "Hi," he said sheepishly. "I didn't mean to. It just sorta, happened. I just wanted to get your attention. Worked too, didn't it?" Quivering with anger, Brenda dropped to the floor without a word, collecting the mess of broken Melmac and eggs. "Let me help you," Harry said, kneeling on the syrupy linoleum. "Don't you touch me," Brenda hissed, slapping a plate out of his hand. "Hey, all you gotta do is marry me, darling, and I'll take you away from all of this," Harry said, with a doltish grin on his face. "Listen to me," Brenda said in a hushed whisper. "I'm already engaged to be married to James Thomas. He's in the army too, but you wouldn't know him. He's not your type. I've got a letter right here in my apron saying he's coming to marry me in 2 weeks, just as fast as he can drive from Fort Collins. He's the kindest man in the whole world, worth 6 of you. You can stop the games, Buster, because I've had it. If you want coffee here, fine, but don't expect anything else." Brenda did not see the faint smile on Harry's face as she rose and walked stiffly into the kitchen. That night, Brenda lay on the bed, about to open James' latest letter. Alan and Elizabeth would be finishing eating in a few minutes, and then she could get started with the dishes. The incident with Harry Donovan had been long forgotten, although she carried the anger home with her, even retrieving a knife from the kitchen to keep in her room. More and more, as the arrival of James drew near, Brenda found herself growing short-tempered and expressing the anger that James and Doc Gray had advised so long ago. Lewis Campbell, curse his soul, was almost history. There was only James, now and forever. Brenda fondled the envelope lovingly, turning it over in her hand. There were a few more precious moments she could devote to James. The script of this letter was odd. James did not write his letters like that. Still, the postmark was from Denver and showed James' home address. The radio was turned up loud, playing another of the obnoxious tunes that had replaced the 60s sound. "You're dirty sweet, and you're my girl." How revolting. I should be downstairs now, Brenda reminded herself. Margot will bitch, but I'm beyond caring, Brenda thought as she fondled the letter. James is coming. I'll clean the house. I'll wash everybody's clothes, but I'll have a few pleasures of my own. The girl smiled wickedly at these new and disturbing thoughts. Shame on me, she thought, but did not mean it. The radio intruded again, gently. Imagine there's no country. It isn't hard to do. Brenda hugged her pillow, pretending it was James. Everything will be just fine if I can hold on just a little bit longer, she thought, closing her eyes and letting the gentle song take her away from Hopkinsville, away to the glorious mountains where James was. I love you, she said aloud, seeing only the purplish glow of her own eyelids, thinking about the man who had rescued her from this house forever. I'm glad to hear it. Lewis stepped lightly into the room, a tomcat wearing mittens. Lay down. No, Dad, please, Brenda moaned, drawing her legs away from him. Shut up, he said, snatching her legs straight, her arms thrown upward from the motion. This was the third night this month Lewis had come to Brenda, poking and prodding her. He said something meaningless about how his day was. He sat on the edge of the bed, casually removing his shoes, those army patent leather ones that made him look so brilliant and polished, that made him look so perfect, so handsome. Brenda bit her lip. She watched from outside herself, the young woman on a bed, unbuttoning her blouse like an automaton. The hands quivered as she pulled down her own panties. Louis stood up, eyeing the girl as he took off his own shirt, then dropped his pants. Bastard, Brenda thought. He must think his little thing is important. We'll see about that. As he turned away for a moment, the girl's hand darted under her pillow. He knelt into the middle of the bed, as he had for so many years. Brenda's hand leapt from under the coverlet, and Louis caught a fleeting glimpse of something silvery raised high in the air. "Bastard!" the girl screamed, as her arm swung up hard and fast. The flashing steel of the butcher knife ascended toward Louis' exposed testicles. "Faugh!" was all Louis had time to utter. It was too late to make a conscious effort, so he threw himself back instinctively, hoping to save at least most of his penis. He winced, feeling the blade cut low into him, and he felt a warm liquid like bloody urine. Louis reached for the edge of the bed, but he reeled from the pain, seeing stars. Louis shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts, but his balance was gone, and he tumbled backwards onto the floor. He strained to see Brenda, and for the first time in his life, Louis felt his heart slow to an icy crawl, his breath freeze within his lungs. He did not recognize it as fear. The girl was crouched at the foot of the bed, naked, on all fours, like an obscene gargoyle. Her hair, matted with perspiration, hung in limp tendrils down her shoulders. Her breathing was labored, like a runner in a race, her eyes slim and evil behind the veiled lids. She still held the knife in her right hand. "Did you like it too?" she said, the sound rolling off her tongue like oil. For a moment, Brenda was sad. The knife wound did not look serious. "Bren," the man said, sounding like a lost sheep. "But Brenda, put that knife down," he finally blurted, licking his lips to dilute the brassy taste in his mouth. The girl moved towards him. Louis looked to the far end of the room, where his clothes lay. He got to his feet, swaying as he held his bleeding groin with one hand, reaching for his pants with the other. Brenda remained crouched on the bed, breathing slower, as if preparing to spring. In a moment he was in the doorway, but he couldn't resist facing his daughter one more time. "I'll be back," Louis whispered hoarsely. "Ha!" Brenda spat the word at him. "Just try." Louis stared for a moment more, chewed his lip thoughtfully, then turned to limp down the hall. He sat morosely in the downstairs bathroom, nursing a 3-inch gash, hearing the shower running upstairs. "I'll get you," he said to the ceiling, laying another bandage on the gaping wound. Brenda lay on the bed, feeling the last of the nervous shakes as they left her limp and exhausted. At last she got up and padded into the shower, rinsing off the slime of her father for what she hoped was the last time. "I'll kill him. I'll kill—" Brenda stopped in mid-sentence, amazed at herself. "Shut up, Bren, shut up," a voice said. "What are you saying?" Brenda put the towel down slowly, staring in the mirror at the girl she once knew. She was shaking, not with fear of Louis, but of herself. "I really mean it," Brenda wondered aloud. "God help me, I really mean it. I want my father dead." She sat huddled on the toilet, absently massaging a cramp in her thigh. The memory of the knife haunted her, and Brenda hated herself all the more, for it was a wonderful memory, a delicious memory. The cramp increased. So did the memory. Brenda doubled her fist, slamming it into her leg, reminding herself what she was with every blow. "You bitch, you whore, you bitch, you whore," until the tears came that always washed the memory away. By 11 o'clock that night, the dishes were done, and the next load of clothes was started. Brenda trudged back up the stairs, amazed at the devilish voice that whispered to her as she passed Louis and Margot's bedroom. "Go on in. You know where the butcher knife is." "Stop it! Stop it!" Brenda had to shake her head to clear it. "No, no," she hissed to herself. "God, I'm a certified nutcase." "Shut up before somebody hears you," Brenda reminded herself. "Who? Never mind who. Don't let anybody hear you. Nobody, do you understand?" Brenda passed her parents' room, successfully ignoring the voice. She reached the top of the stairs where her room was. She showered again, quickly, but it was never enough. She put on her robe while gazing quietly at James' unopened letter, laying where she left it before Lewis intruded. Exhausted and drained, she began to comb out her wet hair. That handwriting looks odd, she thought. Curious, Brenda put down the comb and reached for the envelope, running a long fingernail neatly inside the fold and extracting the slip of paper inside. Dearest Brenda, it read, I am writing this little note in place of the letters I should have been sending you over the last several months. We had no idea how close you and James had become. I understand you come from a military family, and I am glad. Perhaps you will understand what I have to say. I suppose I should introduce myself. I am Christine Thomas, James' mother. Brenda smiled. How quaint, Mrs. Thomas writing a note like this. Still, there was something ominous behind the lines. Brenda's eyes narrowed as she read further. It seems like only yesterday that my James left the house. I want you to know that he was happier than I had ever seen him in my life, and it was because he was coming to meet you. I told his father not to let James drive the high roads across Colorado, but James wanted so much to go. Brenda felt her stomach lurch. Something was wrong. She read on frantically, speeding past the trivial words, looking for the rest of the tale. Took the old Freightliner up into the mountains. Brakes might have failed. Swerved to miss an oncoming car. See the clipping enclosed. So sorry, cannot believe he is gone. I know how very much he loved you. Anything we can do. Love, Christine. Brenda fought back the tears, staring in disbelief at the already yellowing tear of paper in her hand, reading the cold black words, crisply describing James' death. Fatal accident outside of Indian Rock, it said. Apparently the driver, James J. Thomas, 24, swerved to miss a driver traveling west on Highway 70. Thomas apparently lost control of his tractor-trailer and went over the guardrail. The driver was killed instantly, according to officers from the Colorado Department of Public Safety. Funeral services pending. Mr. Thomas was the oldest son of prominent Fort Collins businessman Benjamin Thomas. Survivors include a twin brother, Terry, mother, Christine, father, Benjamin. Brenda stared sightlessly at the letter. Dead? He is not dead. He is not, she said inwardly. James dead is a dream. My father is a dream. I am a dream. The thoughts whirled in her throbbing mind, her vision a swirl of colored light and sound. Not light nor dark, not day or night. Brenda saw James as he had in the days on Okinawa, smiling as he sat on the edge of the bed, his legs swinging. She could tell he was nervous, a cigarette dangling loosely from his lips, as he leaned over a chessboard, contemplating a move. The board was almost empty, the white pieces almost all gone except for a bishop, a pawn, and a king. James moved the black ones as Brenda spoke. Oh, James, I love you so much. Why did your mother write this awful letter? Brenda asked, looking at the boy. James glanced at her briefly, his cobalt eyes sparkling under the sandy brows. You know, I tried to miss that drunk guy. I really did. He sighed, and his clear blue eyes clouded briefly. A deer. I didn't feel anything. I just saw this darned deer. It must have scared him when he saw... James stopped and lowered his eyes. Don't worry about my mother, he said, fingering the cigarette and blowing a long stream of smoke. Take care of yourself. He turned back to the chessboard. Brenda frowned, wiping away more tears. Why are you playing this stupid game instead of talking to me? You never liked chess before. Shh, the boy said, reaching across the checkered squares with one hand. Queen's bishop to king's rook 4. The king is dead. He put the piece in a shirt pocket, then stared at the board gloomily. His face looked sad and resigned. Oh, come on, James. It's only a game. It's not like you'll never play it again, is it? James stared at the girl mutely, and she felt an unseasonable chill. She touched his hand, and his face lit up with the familiar look she'd come to know so often on Okinawa. The effect was so sudden it resembled sunrise. "It's your play, Brenda Jean. Be careful," the boy said, looking earnestly into her eyes. "Remember, I'll always love you, and I'll always be with you." "Of course, James," Brenda said, reaching for him, and she closed her eyes gratefully, awaiting the pleasure of his embrace, but found nothing. Instead, she tumbled to the floor in a heap, her head striking the bedpost cruelly. Brenda winced, then noticed the shadow before her. "What the hell are you doing on the floor?" Margot said, her diminutive frame silhouetted in the yellow light of the hall. Brenda looked up, blinking. At once she burst out crying in long, heaving sobs. She crouched on the floor, hiding her face, dark tracks of tears staining the hardwood planks. "It's only a damn bruise, for Christ's sake," Margot said, stomping back downstairs to the television. Summer faded, but Brenda hardly noticed. Her senior year in school found her as reclusive as ever. She moved lethargically through each day, sitting in the back of the classroom, answering only direct questions from the teacher. Blaine High was a new building in 1971, but Brenda did not notice. She knew she was losing her mind sometime early in the fall. She started throwing up each afternoon after school. It happened on the bus as it pulled up to her house. Brenda felt her insides roll once. The nausea wouldn't stop. Her insides rolled a second time, and she barely got her lunch bag open before she closed her eyes and vomited. It was sudden and violent and over almost as quickly as it started. She glanced around the bus. A few people looked at her. She wiped her nose and looked out the window of the school bus. The yard was empty. She saw his pants hanging on the line in the backyard. That was all. She threw up every day that week. Then she threw up as the bus turned the corner to her street. That went on for 2 weeks. Then it got worse. She threw up at the end of last period class all through November. By December, she was throwing up right after lunch, and every few days it got worse. Every day she passed the chain-link fence in front of the clothesline with the pants hanging on it, and she entered that house, and every day she threw up. It was that house, that street. Brenda realized the whole neighborhood looked depressing. The trees on the sidewalk looked evil and twisted, dark sentinels on the paved road to her own private hell. Sparrows sat on the telephone wires, but you never saw them fly away. Planes sat at the municipal airport behind the house, motionless, like crippled birds. It was that house, that street, but mostly it was him. On the school bus, other students sat away from the silent girl, who sat robot-like at the window. Brenda had already thrown up for the day. Her stomach felt tight, but she could handle it. She stared out at the stark skyline as it roared past. She looked at a bare hickory tree, seeing a palm tree like the one where she and James used to sit. She sat rigidly upright, her hands folded, covered by the flimsy cotton sweater she had bought 2 years before. She stared at the tops of her hands, once so white and soft, now chapped and reddened from the increasing workload at home. Margot seems to have gotten even more lazy since they left the Far East. Now Brenda washed and dried all the clothes for the household, dressed Alan and Elizabeth for school, and prepared dinner. Brenda smoothed back a strand of her long hair, more brown now than the beautiful platinum James loved. She felt her temple gingerly, finding the bruise there from yesterday. Margot had taken to striking Brenda when the house wasn't done to her satisfaction. Louis was visiting Brenda's room regularly again, but she really didn't care. Since James' death, her will to survive, even her will for revenge, had subsided. With a sigh, Brenda reached into her school bag for the pocket organizer she always carried. She flipped the pages listlessly to the last entry. Wednesday, wash clothes. Bring in garbage cans from morning pickup. Damn, Brenda thought. I forgot to take out the trash this morning. Margot will be pissed. There was only one thing Brenda remembered from the trash that morning. Margot and Louis had had another fight the night before, and Margot had run out of ammunition. Her black eyes gleamed when she tore through the bottommost cabinets in the hallway, coming across a cardboard box with Brenda's handwriting on it. Louis was soon being bombarded with an entire set of vintage World War II china that Brenda had found during an outing with James. Brenda came home that afternoon to clean up the usual mess and found one lone demitasse among the scattered shards in the living room. Every other item had been broken. Brenda stood motionless, and everything stopped in her mind again. What did it matter anymore? She woke up again, startled at the splintering sound as the last piece of her trousseau skidded across the floor, making a complete set at last. "Ask me if I care," she said to a passing van, seeing James' face in the cab. Two girls behind her giggled. "Mind if I sit here?" a masculine voice said. Brenda jerked away from the window, seeing a tall, athletic boy standing next to her. "Go ahead." "Want a piece of gum?" the boy asked. "No." The boy shrugged, pulling a wrapper out of the package. Brenda watched his reflection in the window, his blonde hair shimmering in the plexiglass. "Oh, James." She burst into tears. "Gee, sorry I asked," the boy said, moving to the back of the bus. Brenda got off, a fall breeze catching her bangs playfully. Shaking her head, she started down International Drive, an impressive name for the blacktop road in the midst of a pasture which landed small planes. She no longer noticed the brilliant orange leaves against the luminous blue background. In Frederick, with her grandparents, Brenda used to spend hours gazing at the peculiar serrated patterns of the oak leaf in autumn, but today she merely kicked them out of the road. There was no pleasure, no hope. Brenda could see 1402 International Drive through the trees just ahead, and she cringed. Louis was at home for lunch again. The smell of leaves burning assaulted Brenda's nose, and she smiled in spite of herself, recognizing an ancient fragrance from her childhood. Granddaddy raking up a huge pile in the backyard, watching as Junior and Brenda tumbled gaily in the mass of multicolored leaves. Brenda saw Margot in the yard with a rake in one hand. So, the burning leaves were from her house. What was in Margot's other hand? The light glinted off an oblong box at the top of the smoldering pile. Margot was rifling through the box, her hand disappearing, then emerging with sheets of paper. Margot seemed to gaze at each piece for a moment, then dropped it into the growing fire. Brenda was at the curb now, and something urged her on. Her head was throbbing with a growing fear which she could not identify, and her feet hurried across the crunchy stubble of the neighbor's yard. Margot held a 3x5 card high in the air, scrutinizing it. Brenda squinted, focusing on the tiny object. It was a photograph. Yes, a picture of Brenda, dressed in her candy striper outfit at Camp Cooey. No one had those pictures except James. Margot reached into the box again. Brenda felt her heart leap in her throat. Dropping her books in the grass, she raced across the yard, waving madly. "No!" she screamed, her face a drained gray. "Not James' letters! Please, Margot, stop, stop!" "You stop," Margot said as Brenda stumbled toward her. "I've watched you mope around here long enough, Brenda. This is not good for you." Margot waved the letter. "You think I haven't seen you read these letters over and over like the Bible or something? You worship this boy, and he is dead. Dead, Brenda, do you hear me? Been dead more than 4 months now. You must get on with your life. I know it is hard, but this is for your own good, Brenda. Here." Margot shoved a bundle of paper into the girl's lifeless hand. "You help me. It is the only way." Margot watched sternly, her bifocals perched on her hawk-like nose, while Brenda moved mechanically to the flames. "How can I go on?" Brenda asked herself, holding tightly to James' letter. "How can I make her understand that I have no life to look forward to? There is only Daddy. Why doesn't Margot know that? What man would want me now?" Only James understood. Now he is gone, and she is in a hurry to see him go. Brenda's face registered no emotion as she released the paper into the devouring flames. Brenda fell to her knees, moaning softly, her eyes closed as if in prayer. If Margot had known any ancient mythology, she would have recognized the scene. Vestal Virgin. Margot stood by the fire a moment longer, at last satisfied. "Humph!" she croaked, stirring the flames with a rake. "Now he can't hurt you any more." Brenda's eyes flew open, and the expression on her face was suddenly terrible. "Don't you ever talk about him again, do you hear? No one will ever know about the life we had together, and no one will ever know my life. Least of all you." Brenda threw the words at her stepmother, half expecting to be slapped. Instead, Margot stood in silence. She shook her head, tapping the rake on the ground twice, and muttered to herself, "I feel sorry for you, Brenda. To have so much hate for me and your father, I don't understand. I pity you." The woman turned back to the house. "Pity yourself," Brenda called after her. Night came, and Margot leaned out of the kitchen window, watching a solitary figure moving in the darkness. "Get in here and help with supper," she yelled. "There's nothing left out there, you stupid." Brenda looked at the smoldering ashes. Of the 2 years of letters and pictures, there remained only charred fragments. Margot and Brenda had never been on friendly terms before, but from that day on, Brenda spoke to Margot only when spoken to. Years later, Margot mailed a letter of her own to Brenda. "Dear Brenda, hope you are doing fine. As for us, we are okay. Well, I will get right to the point. I thought there was a time when everything was okay, but I guess not. Well, I know everything, and I've been knowing it for a long time. Life is very short. You can try to forgive. If not, your hate will destroy you. You said as a child I didn't give you love, and loved the other children more than you. Oh, you are so wrong, for I always loved you and gave you everything you wanted. As I said before, your father's actions were wrong sometimes, but we are not God. Everybody makes mistakes, and his drinking didn't help either. As far as I can tell, all you want to do is destroy your father and me. God forgive you. I pray for you. As I said, you are not the only one who went through hell. Your father told me about the one time on Okinawa when he was drinking, and he hurt you bad, like you said. I am sorry, but what do you want us to do? Go on our hands and knees and beg for forgiveness? I told you before, we were wrong for things that happened, but for God's sake, for what little time we got left, give us peace, and if not, then tell me what you want. I hope we will come to an understanding, but if not, then God be with you. Love, Mother. Brenda did not reply.